Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Welcome to the Dark Stoa with Patrick Ryan, the baddest man on the internet, or sometimes known as the most dangerous man on the internet. And he was here since the Stoa started, really, and he had 2 seasons of the Dark Stoa. And he tried and tried and tried again to get us canceled, but he failed. And so he's back for another try for a one-off session called Weaponized Witches. How this is going to work, this is your first time here. Pat is going to share his thoughts for, I imagine, anywhere for 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Throw your questions in the chats anytime. I will call on you to unmute yourself when we go to the Q&A portion. If you don't want to be on YouTube, which is probably might be a good idea for this session because this will go on YouTube, indicate that in the chats and I'll read your question on your behalf. And there's only one rule at the Dark Stoa. Keep it clean in the chats, okay? We have Cleo, keep it clean in the chats. Martin here is our bouncer. Cleo, if you can give him a wave. So please keep your dank Chan jokes obscure enough so us stoic normies will miss them. If you don't, then Cleo will throw you out of this room. So that being said, I will tag in Pat and off to you, my friend. Oh, there you go. You can mute yourself.
Howdy, folks. Welcome back for, oh, God, it's been weeks or months at this point. I don't know how long it's been. It's been so busy for everyone, I'm sure. Very eventful in these past Dark Stoa intermissions. So this one will be one that's near and dear to my heart. It's one that I've studied extensively for most of my life. And I trying to get these concepts out on any format other than the one that you're at today is almost impossible. Because when you're talking about witches, everyone has their own personal definition. You know, like, this is my definition of a witch, and this is what I think it's good about it, and this type of stuff. And how did it get that way? Like, why did everybody decide to personalize it and make it their own thing? How did that happen? Well, this chat is going to explore the history of this concept as much as it can. And it's also going to challenge your assumptions, because not only am I going to not necessarily redefine what a witch is, but I'm going to provide why the incentives of defining a witch is so important. And by the time I'm done, you're going to learn the bitter truth on how to make your own. And I promise you'll be able to do that. So with that said, I would like to get started, and I hope I got the same energy as usual. So we'll see. Let me get a full screen on that. And share. Loading. Making sure everybody has it. Get my laser. Pew pew. All right. Weaponized witches on Halloween. Is it Halloween? I don't even know what time is anymore. All right. So moving on to our very first slide. Feminine symbology is where I would like to start when it comes to this concept. I don't want to start with a personal definition. I don't want to start with what I think it is, because I have to do a lot of deconstruction to explain it. So I want to start as much as the beginning as I can with the history of feminine symbology. And I like to start, of course, as you see in my previous slide, this little symbol right there, the alchemical symbol for copper, by the way, not female. People tend to associate this with female. This is actually the symbol for copper, alchemically, and that copper was associated with Venus. Copper was a common household item. So items of the household were associated with the feminine spirit across multiple cultures. And so this kind of binding is there. Copper has a warm essence to it. It's an inviting essence. It's intuited to believe to have a feminine spirit about it. And then, it gets hijacked and turns into a corporate brand. And well, here we are today, right? So copper, in addition to being associated with the feminine, as a result, was also associated with the Roman Venus. And not just the Roman Venus, but also the Levant Venus. So you do the Syria and the ISIS territory and that type of stuff, not the modern one. Don't sue me. And And then there's more feminine symbology involving Victoria and Nike, the goddess of the military indigo complex, as in Romans would march across the land, stab a bunch of people, and take their bounty, and then sell it for Cretan indigo so they can get purple dye for their Senate robes. That's the military indigo complex. But this is again the wings. The feminine and wings are actually deeply connected for most of feminine symbology history. In fact, the idea of angels comes from this, but it doesn't start with Victoria or Nike. We'll get into where that concept came from, but notice the wings on the head and the wings on the back. This was a goddess of war, effectively, not a goddess per se. This is more like this was a spirit that presided over the essence of war in Roman culture, and this was like an imperial spirit. This was an imperial spirit. So whenever generals came back successfully from conquest, whenever they did their triumph, they would pay homage to Victoria or Nike accordingly. And then there's, Gaia, which is the one that is the most common in modern parlance in the New Age sense. Most people don't actually know the history of Gaia. She immaculately conceived Uranus, then decided to boink her own son to give birth to Cyclops and have all kinds of other inbred mutants. I think one of them had like 50 heads or something. Probably a warning about inbreeding. I don't know. She's also the mother of Zeus. Excuse me. She's often seen as Mother Earth because she's at the beginning of the Grecian creation story. But that's a bastardization of words, and we'll step into that when we get there. And you've probably all seen this one. This is a crossover event featuring Nicki Minaj and Butterball Turkey. You've seen this one plenty of times. And then we get to Eve, who's a Jerry Springer candidate. And the reason I say that is because she's born of the fire of Adam. She is told not to eat fruit from a tree. A little snake comes in and tells her to eat it. And instead of just straight up eating it there, which she should have done, she decided to get the only other person in existence and rope him in for plausible deniability, eat the apple, get kicked out of the garden, have 2 kids, and one of the sons murders the other son. That's a Jerry Springer candidate. And I've gone over that previously in other pitches as well. So you might notice that Eve isn't associated with motherhood. There's probably a reason for that. Out of all the feminine symbology that exists, she's really not associated with motherhood, which is interesting and worth exploring. And then you get to Mary, which in South America is more important than Jesus. I don't know how that happened. That's actually worth exploring too. That's actually very interesting how that happened. So these are just examples of feminine symbology. This is not an exhaustive exploration of it, but this is just to prime you and get you ready for the basis of the rest of the reasoning of this presentation. Now, there's one person I've left out. Now, most people who understand this stuff and have studied it even briefly have come across the neck symbol, and they've come across it pretty extensively. And you have these. Most people I've noticed have this like deep bound relationship to the neck symbol, like it's their personal like spirit guardian or something like that. And that's the symbol of Lilith, which I can't pronounce because I don't know why I can't pronounce it. But it's Lilith is this like this feminine anti-hero symbol. And I mean, just saying, she's like the Boba Fett of the Bible. She had like one cameo, and now she has like all these spin-offs. Right, she has like 20 different like deals signed. She's going to be out there marketing, and it's like, okay, like it's like this one person shows up and she gets her own like season and like whatever. And that's true in the Christian tradition. In the Jewish tradition, she's a little bit more detailed, but none of that really matters because Lilith really makes a resurgence in the consciousness of everyone around the late 70s. Sorry, let me wind this back. Around the late 70s, regardless of historical relevance or fact or connection whatsoever. This should make sense because of the sexual revolution and all these types of things. So what the contemporary story about Lilith that is sold and is entirely false is that she was equal to Adam, and she didn't like being equal to Adam because Adam didn't treat her well, so she stormed off in a huff. Right? That's the story that's sold about Lilith in the contemporary parlance, which is utterly nonsense. But you have to, again, remember the time in which it's sold. It's the 1970s. They want to divorce everybody. They're aborting everything they can get their hands on. They're a free spirit. They're right after the 60s. So yeah, of course you're going to need this anti-hero to sell this type of stuff that you're trying to push for. But that's the key word, sell. They sold it. they sold it. It's marketing. Thanks for the money. That's all it was. None of it was true. None of it was real. It wasn't bound to actual history. The actual history of Lilith, she appears 1,000 years before Judaism appears. She's not even, she's not of the Jewish lore natively. She's not of Christian lore natively. She's of Sumerian lore. Again, if you do your research, you'll see this stuff. But nobody sees their research. They trust the marketing, and I guess that's life. She was a storm spirit that preyed on women and children. And someone's not muted. But she was a storm spirit, which tells you something about the origin. Now, Sumeria was one of those Mesopotamia adjacent civilizations. So storms and wind are very dangerous things to Sumerian crops. Wind will blow sand on top of your stuff and you're done. Your crop is toast. And if a storm hits, flash floods there's no roots, there's no trees to absorb that water. So when a storm hits, it is flash floods for miles. It'll wipe out your crop, no problem. So Lilith, this demon that's preying on children and women, this is a symbol to remind farmer. It's not a symbol to remind farmers, but it's also associated with agrarian fears, the fear of losing your crops. And again, this is where that beginning of the female symbology of warning and carnage and destruction, it starts making its associations here, and it has wings. That's the key thing. This feminine evil has wings about it, whereas other things aren't necessarily supernatural. But this is one of those. This is kind of where that winged mythology, the dangerous winged woman, comes in. And again, storm and wind demon. This is the origin of Lilith, not the I hate Adam because these boots were made for walking story. That's not the origin of Lilith. This is the origin of Lilith. And in the Babylonian texts outside of Sumeria, she appears once again. She's the prostitute or the handmaiden of Inanna, or who you may know better as Ishtar. And we'll get into Ishtar on the next slide. And you see again in the Babylio-Sumerian merger, cultural speaking, she presides over temple prostitution. What the fuck is temple prostitution? How do those two words even intersect, right? But that's a thing. These are all the weird things that happen when you just get started with an agrarian civilization and you're just kind of figuring out the rules as you go. What does it mean to have a surplus people because you can feed them? What does it mean when they're able to solve for all their food needs and they have all this spare time? What do? How do you organize them? How do you make them effective? Well, one of those experiments was temple prostitution, and Lilith was one of the presiding handmaidens over it. In fact, prostitute might be a bit of a damning phrase here. I don't know if that's an accurate translation. It's more about the maidens, meaning the young unmarried women, in which prostitutes may have kind of been there as well, because that's where all the men were. So it's kind of like a marketing overlap. So, good marketing skills. But because of that intersection where you have all of these unmarried women and prostitutes intersecting, you very quickly see Lilith being associated with disease and uncleanliness, because it's a way of filtering out what maidens are valuable and what maidens are not. And we'll get into the economics of why that was at that point in time. Excuse me. And again, Lilith appears in the Gilgamesh epic, like spelled exactly. Go ahead and read it. She's in there mentioned, I think, like 8 times. The gladdener of all hearts, of course, temple prostitution, trying to filter the virgin from the prostitute type of process, and the maiden who screeches constantly, because of course it is sexual competition. It's going to drive your neuroses. You're going to sit there and preen yourself. You're like, oh, am I the most beautiful handmaid? Am I not? Am I this? Am I that? It's a neurotic experience. So yeah, Lilith is associated with this neuroses, this kind of evil, this kind of, she's jumping the gamut. Wherever there is like systematic instability for the female spirit, Lilith is there driving it throughout multiple cultures. And of course, it makes sense that she jumps into the Adam and Eve mythology and plugs herself in. Because she's everywhere. She is this universal go-to kind of anti-hero, feminine dark spirit. It's been that way since the dawn of time, apparently. But Lilith was not the ultimate badass bitch. Sorry, I know you probably heard the myth and she was it and that was it, but no, she wasn't. She was serving someone else. she was serving a queen. Surprisingly, she was serving Ishtar. Now, Ishtar is a Mesopotamian goddess associated with love, beauty, sex, justice, war, political power, just raw, carnal, fuck you passion, right? That's Ishtar. Like it's like she just happens to be feminine in form. I think it's just this unbounded spirit that just consumes and destroys. And that's kind of the premise of Ishtar, if you had to define it spiritually. The queen of heaven, that's as boss as it gets, right? And she was especially loved by Assyrians. I mean, this is the level of conquest of this goddess. Ishtar literally supplanted the national god of the Assyrians. Literally just said, nope, Asher's crap. I'm going to take over. That's my country now. I mean, literally, she fin-domed all of Sumer. Just like, boop, get out of here. These are my simps now. And that was it. She was the inspiration for the Phoenician goddess Ashtoreth, who would later become the Greek goddess Aphrodite. So again, this kind of like this is a level beyond Lilith. Like Lilith is out there like being like taking all the hits. Ishtar is out there just like cackling and just annihilating whatever she touches. She's the queen of heaven. You can't fuck with her. That's Queen Bee, right? And who's this Ashtoreth person, right? Well, it's a Phoenician goddess, again, another goddess of war. And you see, I mean, that's a kind of spooky image, that kind of stonework that's going on there. Imagine seeing that in a temple. You're like, whoa, almost looks like a weird kind of skin suit in a strange sort of way, right? Now imagine that polished up in its prime and all of its like alabaster or ivory or whatever stone. Ivory's not a stone, but you know what I mean. Imagine that in its prime with proper lighting in a holy environment and that type of thing. You saw that thing, you'd be like, whoa, like that's the ideal, right? That's the, this thing is frightening me kind of thing. And she was also, both of these goddesses were known as the morning or evening star. Now, you might have heard of the morning star before. You might have heard of the morning star before. Huh? You might have heard of the morning star before. Huh? Is Satan really Satan? I don't think so. I think the idea of Satan comes from here. The mythology behind it. An angel with wings, fallen. The morning star, horned. I think it's worth exploring here to see where these mythologies come from, because when it comes to like feminine symbology, you're starting to notice there's a lot of weird games of telephone and blending, and just like these things are associated here, but then there's a nuance blend here, and then you separate 1,000 years, and now you get this. It's all over the place. But this is an interesting question to see: did the concept of Satan actually come from Ishtar? And you'll see again by the Roman times another female figure associated with war. So you have Ishtar, you have Ashtoreth, who is also known as Astarte for you Warhammer fans, and then you have Victoria. Again, winged. Well, in this case, she's not winged, unfortunately, so that kind of makes it go away. But the horns are there. Horns here in Ishtar, horns here, and then horns/wings. So this legend of the female warpath, psychopath, destroyer of stuff, this is unbroken through thousands of years of human symbology. And that's rather interesting. So it's not just Ishtar running around and being the ultimate badass and Lilith being this anti-hero feminine symbol. There's much more what we would consider boring symbols of the feminine spirit throughout history too. And how do you market that? How do you make someone like a housewife sexy in 1980s like edgy anti-hero land, right? Well, that's where Mother Earth comes in. Now, I said that the concept of Mother Earth, you might have associated it with Gaia. This is where a weird game of linguistics took place in history. There is no such thing as a Mother Earth. It doesn't exist. It is this pieced together construct over the past 200 years. It was never a thing in antiquity. There was no such thing as a Mother Earth. There were mother goddesses that existed in abundance, plenty of those. But a Mother Earth, an omni-feminine warden over all of creation, it's more nuanced than that. It's not this like, boss on top of the world being feminine everywhere. There is a lot more nuance going on here. And where did this idea of Mother Earth come from? Well, it comes from Grain Mother, surprisingly. And I'll explain why that is. We'll start with Demeter, for example, the goddess of harvest and agriculture, presiding over a sacred law, life and death. Antolia, Turkey. She's known as Sybil in Rome. She's Ceres, quite literally cereal, as in cereal grain. And if you break down some of the linguistics, you see the element de, as in Demeter. You see de, and it's connected to Dao, which is on the epithet of Demeter. Could have come from the Cretan word de or zia, which all of it is identified with Elmer spelt or rye. So this is all grain stuff, even to the point where it would take a feminist British scholar, Jane Harrison, to suggest that it actually was grain mother, not earth mother. And that's an important distinction. That's a really important distinction, because if you're talking about earth is one of those words that is just like easy to screw up. Are we talking about the planet? Are we talking about the element? Are we talking about the ground? I mean, these are levels of distinction you have to make sure that you're getting right when you're talking about symbology, or you're going to fuck it up. And again, even outside of modern analysis, we can go to Hesiod. I mean, way back when in Cyprus, grain harvesting was quite literally, I think I can pronounce this, Demetrizen, which again, Demeter, right? It's right there. These are, the words are literally staring you in the face. And then the Demeter's emblem is a poppy, which is a flower that grows among barley. So the grain symbology is here. She's not a mother earth, right? She's a grain mother. And she's not the only person where this like forced mother earth construct gets like jammed down our throats. There's other attempts as well. So you'll see in the Indonesia and Java and Bali, Dwi Suri, which I don't think I'm pronouncing correctly. She is another one. She's touted about as this Mother Earth construct, but in the native tongue, it actually means rice mother. Again, a grain. Rice isn't. Don't think it's a grain, but one of those harvest mothers, right? One of those agricultural feminine spirits. And then Gaia. We're going back to Gaia because this is like where all of the confusion starts. She's the personification of Earth, sure. At the beginning of the Greece mythology, she is quite literally giving birth to creation. Yes, okay, that's as close to a Mother Earth as you're going to get. But again, she didn't give birth to creation. She gave birth to the elements, the wardens of the elements. She gave birth to Pontus, who watched over the sea. She gave birth to whoever was in charge of the earth itself. She gave birth to the sky and the mountains and all of these things, and then all life upon it. She is more in common with fertility and bounty. And the reason this gets confused is because, again, the word earth as an element, not as in the totality of existence, but earth as in the element itself. This is where the grain grows out of. This is where all of the bounty and all of the agrarian civilization is possible, is from fertile earth. So these are how these people are thinking about their divine and their symbology at the time. They're not thinking in the contemporary terms of the world and policy and fucking all this bullshit we tell ourselves now. That's just a forced, categorization. And then again, you see this with Terra, which is the Roman version of Gaia. That's like, Terra meaning earth. Yeah, of course. And then Vulcanus, the god of fire. So again, the four elements: earth, fire, water, and money. I don't know what the other elements are, but those are the four elements. And so trying to say that this is Mother Earth is kind of it's disingenuous, especially when the defense is often, well, Terra Mater was how it was originally pronounced, which is true. But the problem is Mater, meaning mother, that was an honorific given to all goddesses. So to single out Terra as being the only receiver of that honorific is, again, disingenuous. So we're starting to see that this Mother Earth mythical category is really forced and contemporary. It's so much so that even Camille Paglia talks about it in Sexual Persona. The moral ambivalence of the great mother goddesses has been conveniently forgotten by those American feminists who have resurrected them. Of course, that's absolutely true. I walked you through that. I walked you through why she even said that. So there's this contemporary marketing angle being done to these feminine symbologies, and as a result, all the nuance is being dismissed. What people are actually worshiping when they come to this Mother Earth concept is actually from James Lovelock, the inventor of the Gaia hypothesis. He's what people are actually associating with here when they think about feminine symbology. He's he's the reason. He's the one who comes up with the Mother Earth meme. He's the one who really popularized it and made it happen. So this is what people are they're worshiping the headcanon of this guy, not the actual, the symbology that's been done. And just to really drive my point home, because there might be people who are saying, "Oh, Pat, you're being crazy again." Here is Google Ngram. Google Ngram is a beautiful tool that examines the frequency of words throughout books that have been digitized by Google. And Google has digitized quite a few books, a couple 100,000, I believe. So you can actually see the instance of the word Mother Nature and Mother Earth grow at roughly the same rate across the same time span, with the exception of the 60s and 60s and 70s, when you have the hippies just really going all out on Mother Earth. They're just pushing that Mother Earth meme. And then, 60s fail because of any number of reasons. And then cocaine just kind of takes over for a bit. And then the 90s come along. So Mother Earth eventually comes back, and then it holds its mimetic position indefinitely afterwards. So this is examples of a piecemealed construct, something that has just gradually been put together and tested to see, how do I get the maximum amount of penetration for my audiences? And that's what Ngram does. Ngram is pretty cool, and I'll be using it quite a bit for the rest of this slide. So get familiar with it. And again, you'll think of it from a psychohistory standpoint. Like, it's growing in 1820. The industrial age is kicking off, and it's getting more dehumanizing. They're destroying forests, as they did in England. They're mining up all this type of stuff in Pennsylvania. The workers are being just chewed up in these factories. This is less of an example of Mother Earth as in this great feminine warden, as much as it is a reaction against the ridiculousness and the abuses of the industrial era. So these kind of things merge. They merge together. And so, I'm using data for the first time in my slides. So give me a round of applause for that. So moving on, here are the actual people who invented every single ancient symbol of the feminine you've ever seen. You might notice a pattern. You might see one. You might see one. So whenever you talk about these ancient symbols of the feminine, I'm looking at you, Carl Jung. All these people invented them from their own interpretations. They went to a dig site. They found some stuff. They made some interpretations. They said, meh, that's good enough, right? And so these are all the people who did it, and they're all white and male and old. And well, here's a sausage party behind the creation of Wicca. Whoops. That's not good. That's probably not good for PR. It's a shame I dredged that up. So what is this? Where's this? We're starting to see some cracks in this mythology here. But I'm not here taking pot shots, because if you've seen my Facebook posts for the past 2 months, one, I don't apologize. But two, it's been there's some interesting psychological warfare going on, which I can expound at a later time. But this is a much more nuanced review of why my Facebook feed is a total shit show right now. And so again, we're going to go back to Ngram. We're going to look at the phrase Wicca. We're going to look at Wicca and Wiccan and how much it appears. And you'll see around 1980, the 2000 just spike. Huge spike. No mention of it in books for 200 years. Meh, it's not a thing. Whatever, Wicca, who cares? Sounds like a furniture. Nope, you get to 1980 and whoop, up it goes. Again, at the same rate in which Mother Nature and Mother Earth explode. So these things are now being fused. These concepts are fused together and growing at the same time. Around the 1980s, forcing the existence of this feminine anti-hero. These are all of the individual symbols that are underlying the feminine anti-hero. Around 2004 was peak Wicca, just for a fun little fact. I think the edgy teens from the 1980s turned 39 around 2004. And I don't know, maybe their kids are teens, and I don't know what happened, but they just stopped. I mean, you know who I'm talking about, right? This person. But this was, it just kind of died off. Maybe it was 9/11. Maybe the world moved on. I don't know what happened. I actually don't know that one, but that was when peak Wicca was hit. So that's worth exploring, right? And then let's look at witch. I mean, we're here talking about weaponized witches, right? We're exploring all the symbols behind witches. So let's look at the actual word itself in Ngram. And it's pretty constant. I mean, it's in books, it's there. It's not completely gone like Wicca, but it's there. It's doing its thing in history and books being mentioned. And then again, 1980, whoop, up we go. So again, this whole like feminine anti-hero, 1980 was the birth of this stuff. It was not only born, but it was rushed. I mean, look at this. What is the ad spend, you think, for this? To have this word appear in thousands of books at the same time, continuously growing over time. What do you think the ad spend is for that? How much does how much does Macmillan and Random Penguin pay for this stuff? Right? There's a lot of money to be paid for this, for all these writers just somehow coming up. We're going to write about witches and Mother Nature and Gaia and these type of things all at the same time. It sounds like collusion to me. And this is probably helping the push, of course, for those who are old enough to remember that movie. This is one of those near and dear movies for anyone who follows this stuff and is of the feminine persuasion of this time, I should say. Let's keep going. Why not pick feminist? Sure. I mean, let's go all the way. I don't say feminist and witch is probably associated too tightly, but maybe 6 or 7 hops away, ontologically speaking. Now, interestingly, the word feminist just doesn't exist. Just whatever until 1970. And then it explodes. So this is kind of like a foreshadow. This is a forerunner of the 1980s explosion of these other words in terms of their frequency distribution. Feminist is the word that kind of shows up and really does stuff. It's kind of like a canary in the mine saying we're here to do our push. And just throwing that in there because this is the 80s. What do you want? Power shoulders, man. And now her and she, because I think this is the strongest indicator. This is almost a weird indicator where you'll see her and she show up. And these other words are also being measured too. Woman, women, girl, mother, girls, female, feminine, mother. I'm searching all these things and they're okay. They're in the space, but compared to her and she, and that makes sense because I mean, this is a pronoun of heavy use when you're trying to connect verbs and nouns together. So these words show up quite often. So it's her and she, and again, that 1980s spike once again shows up even in the pronouns. So it's not just concepts being rushed into existence. It's not just witches. It's not just feminist or all these other words, these nouns. It's also the pronouns being rushed into existence as well. So this is hard collusion. This is hard collusion. It's very, very hard to say that this is all coincidence. Okay, here comes social justice Reddit. Well, what about her and him? They want to do comparative studies. Let's do some comparative analysis then. Okay, let's look at her and she versus he and him over time. He is dominant. There it is. Proof of the patriarchy. There it is. He is dominant. All right. But here's what happens over time. The gap here is very wide, early 1800s. And by the time it's done, even he shows up in that 1980s rush, right? So that might be indicative of a just mass generation of books, right? That's totally possible. But at the end of that mass generation, the gap between the two has closed significantly. So again, more collusion. Now, of course, it's a complete coincidence to certain audiences. So let's get real into this. Since we're talking about witches now, let's get into like some of the more contemporary things that witches are associated with, like the devil and Satan and atheism and witch hunts, right? So let's look at the history of these word frequency distributions and associate them with events and see what's going on. So the word Satan and devil shows up at the reprint of Paradise Lost, which makes a ton of sense. Around 1830, 1820, Paradise Lost was being reprinted in Britain. And John Martin produced this just unbelievably sweeping epic painting called Belshazzar's Feast. If you look that one up sometime, it's actually just like, whoa. It's just like every biblical ominous symbology just jammed into one oil painting. It's pretty intense. And so you see this, this naturally, you're going to see these concepts show up in a reprint of Paradise Lost. I mean, no kidding. That's going to be one of the most talked about things in English literature at that time. No kidding, right? And again, this is for the English language. This isn't for the world, right? So this is going to incorporate like Canada and Britain and the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth and America. So this is all prints, right? So then we see the American Civil War. Surprisingly, devil just drops off. Now, you'd think from a war propagandist standpoint, that doesn't make sense. You might say, well, the Confederates are devils and the Unions are devils. That should be like low-hanging propaganda fruit, right? Nope. For whatever reason, you'll see this pattern repeat in multiple wars where the usage of the word devil actually just plummets, like significantly. I don't know what the hell's going on there. Then you get to here, you see Satan show up again. And this makes sense because in this time period, this bump, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Methodist Episcopals, Seventh-day Adventists, the Theosophical group, and the Christian Scientists all form in like this 20-year period in this bump. So maybe the usage of Satan was part of their marketing push. Like, oh, you have Satan problems? Our version of this will help, right? So yeah, maybe it's a marketing push. Who knows? Then you get this is a phrase, dispensationalism, premillennialism. What a mouthful of fuck. So this is the peak of that particular concept, which is a fancy way of saying cutting up God's plan into eras. That's all that means. So we're going to cut it up into creation, doing things, some other things, and then rapture, right? So they're putting a calendar on this religious understanding of things. And that's what this word salad means. And they assumed, because it's the 1900s, the end of the century, this was low-hanging fruit to kind of exploit that sort of stuff and say, oh, it's the turn of the century, it's going to be the end of the world. I mean, you remember Y2K, right? We've been here before. We know what this is. This isn't far-fetched. So this was that going on basically, and you'll see. Well, we'll talk about the trend in a moment. We're just going to keep going. Again, World War I, devil drops off. Just whoop, gone. And then Prohibition comes along with the temperance and the Protestant progressives. Just there's the devil. The devil's in that drink. Can't be drinking that stuff. That's evil, right? Then again, World War II, devil drops off. So then we get the witch hunt, which actually bumps up in the Joe McCarthy investigations. You don't see, like, witch hunt doesn't appear before that at all. Like, not at all. It's not even a fear. It's not even a concern. Only in the 1950s does that actually show up and be like, oh, wow, look at that. That's a phrase. That's a point of concern. And then here's that anti-hero thing where everything spikes. Devil, witch, Satan, atheist takes a little bit of a bump up. Witch hunt goes down. It comes up again under Donald Trump. But everything else just spikes up. And this is a coordinated push. Ladies and gentlemen, look at how uneven all this stuff is. And then you get a coordinated push across all English-speaking nations. Not just America, not just the UK, not just Canada, but all of them. And this is the post-Roe versus Wade period as well. Now that's curious. Of course, then Reddit comes along with there's atheist push and I'm too busy debunking Christians on the internet. So that gets a little bit of love after, a long time of being ish, So I'm using religious evil as a zeitgeist thermometer in this case by examining the frequency of words, mapping them to events. I might be wrong about this one, but the key here is that it's the trending you want to watch. It's the trends of these activities you want to see. So from the 1800s to 1880 to 1930, all the way up to current time, right? These are two major upward shifts of these religious evils being pushed in the word space at the very least of print, right? So keep these arrows in mind as I move on to the next slide. So now, what I'm doing is by using the word distribution, I want to talk about the idea of commodifying the feminine. That means making the feminine accessible for a price, making the feminine so common that other feminine symbology is now competing with each other to achieve the lowest possible price. And this makes sense because the industrial age created material abundance where there are more humans. And if there's more humans, there's more pressure to keep labor costs down due to surplus labor, but not just labor costs. Every creative endeavor of the human spirit also gets plowed under this monumental force of population growth. And it is a monumental spark of a force. The more people you have, the more people who are unskilled have to cut their own throats because, what other skills are they bringing to the table? That's how it's usually. That's price discovery. That's basic economics. But now I'm going to introduce a new chart that you may not have seen and won't have access to, and I can defend it as best I can. because Google uses this source as an authoritative source, and so therefore I'm allowed to too. And if you have problems with me using this source, you feel free to take it up with Google. Now, what I've done is I've looked at the frequency of women being the focus of legal changes worldwide throughout history. Now, Wikipedia has a list of this stuff, and they have additional references. They have additional points that you can then follow up on that are not mentioned on the main page. And I decided to follow all of them. And so I counted the accumulated sum of all the times that women were the focus of legal changes. Now, to be clear, the focus of legal changes does not mean improving the quality of life. That's some contemporary bullshit that you have to suspend for the sake of this graph. I can't even measure quality of life changes. How do you even begin that? I'm only talking about where women are the focus of legal changes, good or bad. Obviously good, obviously bad, unintended good, unintended bad. I can't even make that quality of life assessment. So one of those examples would be women can't have abortions. That would be the focus of a legal change. Another one would be women can vote. That would be the focus of a legal change. Again, no matter what, right? No matter however the target is, however they're targeted. But the frequency maps human growth, explodes. It's an interesting correlation. And again, remember keeping those arrows in mind, those arrows of word usage about witches. You see, the population starts to tip up in a new way that is not normal here. All of a sudden, concern. And then as soon as women become the focus of legal changes, all of a sudden, concern. And then when shit really takes off, ta-da, now we're back. What the fuck is going on here? Am I just seeing things in the numbers? Maybe I'm seeing things in the numbers. But let's say, for the sake of argument, I'm not. What's going on here? What's actually going on here? I'm glad you asked. Let's find out. I could tell you what's going on by the amount of antidepressants women are taking. I can tell you that. I can tell you if we look at that study in this one, which is the demographics of long-term antidepressants for older white women, they account for 58% of adults who have used antidepressants for at least 5 years during the Trump years. Go figure. If we take the age range between 45 and 80, just to cap it, because I'm not going to take 90-year-olds. I don't know, maybe I'm ageist. And that's going to put the earliest date of birth for women in this antidepressant study at around 1930. Because if the oldest is going to be 80, then that puts them born at 1930. So let's take that. Let's say 1930. Now, if you were a woman born in 1930, you will have lived from 1930 to now, and you will have received twice the amount of rights that women worldwide have had since 2400 BC in an 80-year period. You will have rights rained the fuck down upon you in a way that human beings have never experienced for all of history, for what's recordable at least. And their antidepressant consumption shows no signs of slowing down. It's almost as if the more rights we give them, the more they're not ready for it, or more they don't know what to do with it, or more the marketing vehicle is intentionally fucking them, or maybe there's resistance upon it, or maybe it's all of it, maybe it's none of it. Who knows what's going on? But what I do know is that when you start dumping rights on a population, oh man, there's a saying we have in America where it's rags to riches to rags in 3 generations, where you have the opportunity to make something of yourself and you do, and then you fuck it up at the end. And I don't know. I'm just going to quote Fight Club here. You know, I wonder if another right is the answer we really need. Maybe we should step back and kind of like, hey, what's going on in this swing? So why did the number of rights literally double since 1930? What the fuck happened, right? What is going on here? And why does it correlate with population growth? Well, let's take Gregory Rawlins, the person who broke me of my Marxist fantasies. And he doesn't like sharing this story. And I hate the fact that I'm recording this. And he's free to dismiss me for saying this. But he would occasionally snap his students to awareness when he felt like they were distracted. He would ask this question: what took women so long to desire equality? Now that would always get their attention. That would snap them the fuck too. They'd be like, oh, what do you, and they do all this shit, right? And then they pay attention, right? But he was asking a very interesting question, because this seems so obvious. The desire for equality seems so obvious that to suggest that someone doesn't desire it is insulting. And he knows that. That's why he's wording it that way. He's doing it on purpose to get your attention, right? And so when you look at this chart regarding, the focus of legal changes worldwide, you might even have the argument about the patriarchy. You might say, well, see right here, this gap right there, there's the patriarchy. We have the proof. We did it, right? We fucking did it. There's our actual tangible proof. Despite the clickbait journals and the gonzo academics who are really pushing it these days, and the zero financial record transactions and all this stuff. You might look at this and say, there it is. We found a smoking gun. Got him dead to rights, right? Again, that's a frame. That's not a truth. And I look at this patriarchy concept because of him, because of what he was able to do for me. I look at this as like a convenient conspiracy theory that kind of says, well, you don't have to really, we have our numbers, so there's no need to look into the nuance and there's no need to go into historical context. And this is the internet, and the internet's only big enough for one conspiracy theory. We can't have two of them rolling around like this. It's either the patriarchy or the Rothschild. So pick one, and it's only one conspiracy theory that's going to win here, right? So let's like look into this period outside of what is obvious, right? Because what is obvious is that laws, women were not the focus of laws. That's what we can definitively state. But why? Now, if you were to say, oh, it's a patriarchy, that would imply very strongly that all males of all times across all ages, regardless of the ability to communicate with one another or not, all simultaneously agreed to not focus on women for their laws. Back in 5000 BC, we just all got together across the globe with smoke signals and carrier pigeons and said, fuck these hoes. That's not what we did. That's not what we did. So what happened? What the fuck happened? We have to talk about population scarcity and population surplus. That's how we understand what the hell happened here. So if we take a tiny tribe and a population is very small, and each person in that tribe has a very specific role, that means humans are assets. And how do I know that humans are assets in this scenario? Because if I remove the metal worker, I got a problem. Everyone in this tribe has a problem. Weaver has to use wood needles, which are inferior quality. Butcher needs new knives and he can't get them. Farmer can't repair his tools. Woodsman has a rusty axe. Everyone's kind of make by with their hobbled equipment now because one person in that group is gone. And so when you have a shortage of humans, humans are actually more valuable than they are now. There's more responsibility, there's more on them. Bet you wish Walmart existed now in this scenario. This might explain why we even built Walmart. We were all too busy fighting this little fight, dealing with the population scarcity problem. So why is there population scarcity? Well, it's very simple. Women can only give birth so fast. That's it. That's the source of population scarcity. It takes 9 months. Got to take 9 months, gestate, pop out the kid. Takes at least 14 years to raise the kid just before they can become seriously productive to the tribe. Effectively, the hoo-ha of a female is the primary means of wealth creation. They don't teach you this. They don't show you this method. They don't teach you this stuff. They don't want you understanding scarcity, and they want you framed in this fucking war of the genders, right? That's what they want because it's good for marketing. It's human scarcity. That's it. Because every time you make a baby in a scarce population, that's more potential units of transmutation, more power, more influence, more wealth. Only when population is scarce, by the way. We'll get to the inverse in a moment. So now she's basically a female across all agrarian cultures, and this is how you can have females treated the same way across all agrarian cultures without having people having to communicate and collude here. Females are effectively printing presses for wealth in antiquity. They print wealth. That's what they do. Because every little human you make can become a farmer or a soldier or a miner or a builder or something useful. Now imagine if this printing press decided to randomly spend itself. You would be very ass mad. You'd say, oh, well, printing press, make me $1 million. And then they hand you $200,000. You're like, what the fuck? Where'd you spend that $800,000? And the printing press says, fucking, I don't know, I lost it. I burned it. I don't know. Dolphin ate it. Who knows, right? You'd be really mad. You'd be really upset. You'd think your printing press was faulty. So what do? You have to inspect that printing press. You have to make sure it does its job. And how do you make sure it does its job in the case of this printing press? Well, you have to control the mind and the heart of the female. And this is what antiquity has done, is what we've selected for. Because this is wealth. You just can't be dumping out kids of any old random dude you can find. No. Whoa, hold on. We're trying to build a dynasty here, lady. We got to build a bloodline. What are you doing here? We're building a tribe. We're building some shit here. So what are you doing? No. Get your head right. Get your heart right. We got a plan here. This thing can't be spent willy-nilly. We got to put this to work in a meaningful way for everybody involved, or we're going to get fucked here. And then you see the harshness of stepping outside of those controls, where you see things like stoning. Right? But that's look at this. It's Mr. Powell, the Federal Reserve. He's upset about the baby standard. Oh, good for you. But the human scarcity normalizes extreme punishment because any individual failure results in collective destruction. If this source of wealth creation steps out of the tribe, that tribe is doomed. It is doomed. So the value of the feminine and the symbology about feminine value all comes from this population scarcity relationship. It doesn't come from the patriarchy. It doesn't come from these stupid offhanded conveniences. This is the core economic driver of human relations. And let me just really knock this down even further. When you have a male and a female in a population scarce environment, they rely on each other, whether you like it or not. Like, they absolutely rely on one another for their own survival. If any one of them decides to step out of place and screw around and do some dumb shit, it immediately impacts the other, which drives the other one to intervene instantly and say, get your shit together. And so now my reputation matters because people rely on me and I rely on other people. And this is in the backs of other people's minds when they're in these type of mutual relationships. And so you have this mutual reliance across multiple domains: biological, sociological, psychological. You guys can read all the domains, right? And so why is this? Is this imposed by law? Is this imposed by morality? Is this the church getting in the way of human freedom? No, this is fucking psychology. There's only so many Dunbar slots you can have. And you want to make sure that the Dunbar slot is mapping to an actual person. That's how you maximize your relationships. Because you have human scarcity. You have a population scarcity. Your Dunbar slots can represent an actual person now. It's not cluttered with a bunch of other shit. It's not cluttered with the icon of a corporation or a fucking character from a book or a movie. That icon, that slot of John is fucking John, period, because there's only so many people in your tribe. So your Dunbar slot is actually maximally occupied in the way it was designed to be maximally occupied. And that's where the mutual reliance comes from. That's where the value of the feminine comes from. So what happens when population scarcity gets solved? What happens when you have population abundance? It means humans are commodities. They're not assets anymore. Now let me demonstrate. Let's say we just randomly kill this dude at the Green X. Just fuck him. Joe, you're dead. Sorry. Who cares? More crack, please. There's another million people. Who gives a shit? Because humans are commodities. They're replaceable. They're all equally worthless now because there's an abundance of them. Dealing with this problem has been tough because a lot of our morality comes from the population scarcity phase. And when we try to decouple from scarcity morality to abundance morality, nothing but problems happen because the abundance is temporary. The abundance is always temporary. It is not the norm. So if you try to shift to an abundance morality and try to hold it, oh man, you get nothing but problems. You get really complicated problems that you're not going to solve. So let's look at what happens when the female becomes a commodity. The female body, the female spirit, the female symbols, the female everything. Everything about the female she will ever be becomes a commodity. Let's see what happens now. Well, in times of human abundance, cognition is the primary means of wealth creation. What are you thinking? What are you inventing? What are you doing? What are you innovating? What are you doing, Tuts? What's going on up here? That's your wealth creation. This is your printing press now. It's not your womb. Womb's not your printing press anymore. This is your printing press. So now you're putting out bits instead of babies. Congratulations. Ooh, fucking equality. You did it. Putting out zeros and ones. Tap, tap it. You did it. More bits equal more potential units of transmutation, more power, more influence, more wealth. Same fucking chain of reasoning, different source. Instead of babies, it's bits. Feels like equality, right? Now, if your bit generating robot decided to randomly make more of itself, you'd be terrified. I mean, that's the whole concept of gray goo and Terminator, right? You don't want these things running around reproducing endlessly. It's bad, you know? What about the environment, right? So what do? Well, you still got to regulate stuff. You got to regulate that womb and you got to regulate that heart. All we've done is change what we focus on. We've just changed what our wealth creation part of the human body is. That's all we did. We didn't liberate anybody. We didn't make anybody more equal. We just said, instead of babies, you're making bits now. And by the way, keep that vagina barren, because we're already at peak population saturation, and anything more is going to destabilize the system. So keep that thing barren and keep that thing guarded. Notice, no matter what the situation is, we're guarding that heart pretty well, by the way. That's probably worth exploring. But the cognition, that's your printing press now. All we did was flip our focus. Didn't liberate shit. Just changed, just shuffled the cards around. That's all we did. What happens when you have human abundance? It normalizes mass dehumanization. You got to keep that womb barren. Got to keep it barren, because any individual success can ruin collective destruction. If one wealthy person just shoots up out the norm, that person's going to destabilize stuff. So you got to start butchering him and all his friends and make skull piles out of it. And we've been doing this for the past 150 years. And oh, by the way, instead of making babies, that project at your boss's office, that's your surrogate child now. Because we can't, you can't have your baby, but we'll give you a really terrible proximity to one. That's all we did. We didn't achieve some grand vision here. So when you see the laws not being focused on, it's because women were assets. Women were treated as assets, and all the laws about that were not recorded in terms of women and not recorded in terms of that stuff. They were recorded in terms of property. So when you say women as property, another way to look at that is women as assets, women as the source of wealth creation. And they were treated as such. And if they stepped out of line, oh man. In antiquity, women were treated like you were born in the fucking mafia. You step out of line in the family, that was it. All the laws were written like that. It's mafia shit. But in abundance, who cares? Who gives a shit? Oh, she died. Whatever. Find another whore. Literally, that's the reasoning. This is the psychological stuff we do to ourselves. So what does it mean when humans are commodities in a relationship? Well, there is no relationship. Humans are commodities. Only the individual exists. That's it. There's no pressure for mutual work. There's no mutual seeing eye to eye. It doesn't exist. Now it's mutual competition. You're competing for all the resources in all these different domains. And why is that? Well, just like the Dunbar slot is the source of feminine wealth creation, value, and appreciation, the same is true in population abundance. Because there's so many people, a Dunbar slot does not occupy a person anymore. It occupies more symbols. So this symbol is actually a proxy for 15 other symbols. We're not even talking about humans anymore. The Dunbar slot was made for humans, and we have to put in these really lossy versions of humans in them. Oh, and this gets worse, because if we can have one symbol represent this many symbols, each one of these can also represent that many symbols. And let me show you how stupid that looks. And this is all a byproduct of population abundance, by the way. So you take the symbol of socialism. I'm just throwing it out there because that's the most popular one these days. We'll take that one glorious symbol, however you personally defined it. Here it is. Here we did it. We got the thing, right? And it's a compressed symbol. It's about fairness, equality, and justice. However you want to define them. We're not out here fucking having arguments about definitions. We're talking about the symbols themselves and what they're representing. So this one symbol represents 15 symbols that represent this type of, these domains of fairness, equality, and justice. And then each one of those represents this many symbols about the poor and the oppressed. We haven't talked about a single human being yet, by the way. We're 3 layers into decompression. We haven't hit a single fucking human yet. So now, talking about the poor and oppressed, now we're mapping it to almost people we know who are poor and oppressed, who are demanding fairness, equality, and justice, who then umbrella up into and socialism. But we're still not talking about people, and even more so, now we're talking about our own personal suffering. So we are so far removed from an actual human being in our Dunbar slot. It's amazing we can even talk to each other. Now, it turns out our neurology is actually good at handling this. It's actually surprisingly good at handling this. So here's an example of our neurology handling this, because a lot of our neurology waxes and wanes between population abundance and population scarcity. It's all the Dunbar economics here going on. Now we're looking at, in this case, we're looking at that wildness, that abundance of population causing that symbol compression. That's just like fucking, there's no humans in it anymore. How are we conveying with one another when the symbols get so compressed that it's almost illegible? So let's say this person associates with a domain, this person associates with a domain, and they're attempting to communicate with one another, right? So they talk about their one symbol, which decompresses, 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 and the same is true over here, right? It looks like a total mess, right? So let's say this person says, I'm a conservative. This person says, I'm a conservative. Let's say that, I'm just throwing these numbers out there. There's a 40% chance that these people will convey the meaning because they're using that high level symbol. They're using this simple concept to convey to one another. And they're saying, oh, I'm of this concept. I'm of this symbol. I understand this symbol. I associate with it. Oh, I associate with this symbol too. And so they can convey to one another, and using that surface level symbol, like I'm throwing this real quick symbol at you. So, I got you. I recognize you across the bar. I know why you're wearing that hat. That type of thing, right? That's a 40% conveyance. But as soon as you start mining into these symbols and decompressing, your conveyance just fucking drops. Now, why is that? Well, because it takes neurological energy to decompress symbols. So if this person's talking about conservative, maybe they meant libertarian conservative. And if this person's talking about conservative, maybe they meant cultural conservative. But you won't know it until you decompress. And when you decompress, now you got conflict because, wait, I thought you were talking about that other symbol. It's actually these other ones. All right, well, okay, now there's social risk here. Let's keep going. Maybe there's something to be had up. No, just kidding. Nope, not having there too. Because when we start explaining what we mean, now it's even worse. Because now we're not even talking about this original symbol anymore. We're trying to find these nuances and connect stuff and read each other's moods, because there's so much information being passed in the linguistic symbol space that we're just reading each other's body language at this point. And now it's just on fucking autopilot. I'm not even talking to the person anymore. I'm not even talking about the original concept anymore. I'm just trying to win some type of argument. And it's just not going to work because I'm getting even more down into this fucking nuance that no one even gives a shit about. And then by the time you hear it, it's just fucking over. You have wasted so much neurological energy to get to this point. You'll settle for either a victory or you'll just cut and run. Just say, fuck it, right? So we're good at this. This isn't an ideal methodology of communication, by the way, but we know how to handle this. Our brains have come up with techniques to deal with even this. So it's not all is lost. But let's say you wanted to fuck this up. Let's say you wanted to make sure that there was no way to communicate whatsoever. How do you do that? How do we take this symbol decompression scheme and say, let's ruin even that? Oh, poor bird down here wants cracked. That's cute. What if you were to rush the symbols into existence and bind them to every single authority you can find? What if you say, we're going to take all of the feminine symbols and we're going to bind them to law and culture and religion, and we're going to colonize every single authority. So when you defer to authority, there will be a feminine symbol sitting there waiting for you, just waiting like a trap. What if you did that? What if you rushed all the symbols of the feminine into every single authority space? What does that look like? How does that look for this decompression process? So we have our dark feminine anti-hero Lilith and the Ishtarian supplicants over here. All my symbols are bound to every single conceivable authority. Whatever she says, there is a legal ramification, there is a cultural ramification, there's a social ramification, there's a culture. I always said culture. There's a financial ramification, there's a religious ramification. Every symbol she utters is a landmine. It's a field of landmines. So what does that do to communication? Well, because she bound it to authority, well, she personally didn't bound it to authority. Somebody bound it to authority on her behalf. Because this was done, what the fuck? How do you navigate that landmine? That landmine field? It's a lot of neurological energy. It's a lot of social risk. It's heavy risk. And the only option is to submit. That's it. Because if you fuck up, you're going to get hit by the law. And if you fuck up, you're going to get yelled at. And if you fuck up, you're going to get censored. You might get your bank account taken from you. You might lose your job. These things might start to sound familiar if you've been looking at the internet lately. You might have seen these things. So now your ability to decompress symbols is just gone. Just can't even do it anymore. Just can't do it. The risk is too high. The reward is too low. Because somebody rushed all of the symbols to authority. That's my theory. But I know where I might be wrong here, and I'm always interested in following up and seeing what I got wrong here. Meanwhile, the military grade neurochems intensify on this side of the equation, but not that side of the equation, which is interesting in and of itself. So I promised that you could build these witches yourself. It's not enough to call them out and say, here's how they are actually operating, I think, based upon symbol binding and authority tricks and this type of stuff. Let's start building these witches ourselves, because if you can't beat them, join them, right? So how do we build these broads? Well, it's quite simple. We're going to look at filter pressures, meaning we're going to take a person, we're going to run them through a gauntlet. We're going to run them through all the gauntlet. We're going to make sure that this person, by the time they reach the end of this chain, is exactly the witch we're looking for. So over time, we're going to go from low pressure to high pressure. And so what do these pressures look like? We're going to find women who have parental susceptibility, meaning their parents are fucking deadbeats and they don't care about them. Usually poor women or women with very bad parents for one reason or another. But you can find these people. You might notice this picture, which is probably the saddest thing you'll ever see. That's a low pressure. And the reason it's low pressure is because, it's a kid in the background. They don't know any better. They don't have the full awareness of what's going on neurologically. So let's step it up to the next filter. Now we got to find authority recourse, meaning when we start intervening on this child's life, is there authority that is going to say, hey, stop doing that. You shouldn't do that. And if there is, can I pay them off? If the answer is yes to all of that, congratulations, they've passed the filter. Now we can target them full time. Emotional sensitivity. Oh, by the way, this last bit, authority recourse, that's public school, by the way. Public school is where you have unlimited access to these kids and you can make them do whatever the fuck you want. I mean, they have school shrinks. I remember in the 90s, they were dumping Ritalin into all of us. So then you filter, once you have this full access to the child, at least for prolonged hours, now you filter for emotional sensitivity. Try to find emotional sensitivity is a strong indicator that things are wrong and there's an imbalance. That is what you want to filter for. You want to find that. And you want to test the limits of that sensitivity. Then you find addiction susceptibility. So they reach their teens. You now understand that, okay, what type, are they demonstrating patterns of addiction? Are they looking into drugs and alcohol and any of these types of things? Then you look for disassociation capacity, because once you're doing the addiction, the person is willfully, voluntarily creating two different definitions of themselves, the sober and the not sober. And so once that person is disassociated there, if they haven't disassociated beforehand, then you could definitely make the disassociation now, because they're already on narcotics. Now you can push the limits of that. You can find the total capacity of their disassociation before they break. Then once they finally break, they have to rebuild themselves. Duh. They got to rebuild themselves through power training. And they're old enough finally to rebuild themselves through sexual experimentation, usually in the 18 range and up from there. And then finally, once they've exhausted this and they've reclaimed and rebuilt their identity entirely from scratch after disassociation, we now do identity framing, meaning can that person snap and change identities on context instantaneously? Once you've done that, congratulations, you've created your witch. Now, I'm not making this as horrific as this is, by the way, and I don't mean to be so glib as I'm saying it, but this is a thing. I don't know why that green line's there. This is a filter candidate, right? So not everybody's passing this filter, and most people with sense will turn the fuck around at every single stage of this and say, this is abuse, get me the fuck out of here. People will do this, and if you have people who care about you, they will also come in and say, put a stop to this shit. But it's not true for everyone, unfortunately. And so what ends up happening is either people get turned away or they break entirely at either one of these stages. And by the time you're at the very end, you got maybe 100 people. You started with 100,000. Now you're at 100. Now you might say, Pat, that is the most cruelest thing I've ever heard. You might be right, because traditionally this technique doesn't work. This approach to this insane approach does not work until the internet happened. And then it really fucking worked. How is that possible? How can I take 100 people who have survived this gauntlet of insanity and turn that into an army of witches? I'll show you. Using psychological lookalikes to identify others. Now, what is a psychological lookalike? Here are the 5 people who have survived the gauntlet, our 5 witches. They're prototypes, they're templates, they're the beginning. Let's look at the population of females that I'm looking for now. I say, okay. I have all the data of all these women, all the clicks they've done, all the websites they've been to, all the places they've seen, all the conversations they've had, the words they use. I have it all. What I want to do is I want to find women who acted just like these people did on the internet. And now I have my psychological lookalike, which then filters away everyone else. And now I've turned my 5 women into 15 more. Oh, and by the way, none of them even know they have a mental condition. These ones do, because we ran it through the gauntlet. These ones were not ran through the gauntlet. They just happen to behave like these people, but they don't know they have psychological issues. They don't know. Which means you can intervene on them at any given moment, and you could scale from there. You could take these 5 candidates and turn them into tens of thousands. And all of them will not know that they have psychological issues. And that is how you weaponize witches using modern technology. Now, if any of this is horrifying, it should be, because these are the techniques that were used for radicalization in Iraq. They were used for radicalization online. They were used on Tumblr. They were used on 4chan. I fucking hate Cass Sunstein, but these are the techniques that were used. And they're still being used to this day. Psychological lookalikes. They are worse than nuclear weapons. They can disintegrate entire civilizations. And that's how you weaponize witches. As soon as I can get out of here.
All right. So start throwing your questions in the chat. Please have a cue or question before so I can spot it. I'll warm up Pat with a question. For the people who came in late, people were trickling in, could you give a brief elevator summary, pitch summary of what just happened? And I'll take another question with that. Like, why are they being used? Someone just put that in the chat, and who are using them?
Sure. Brief summary. Weaponizing witches is studying the intentional destruction of feminine symbology for the sake of trying to get people psychologically ready for population abundance. It's probably the easiest summary. And then once they're in this state where women are now as equally worthless as men, what happens now is you can use psychological lookalike tricks to find assets and people who have certain psychological dispositions to then weaponize them and use them for, well, anything you want.
And then the why and the who, why it's being done and who's doing it.
Why? Yes. Why it's being done is because when you have, this technique doesn't just work on women, by the way. I should probably preface this. This technique works on men too. You can radicalize men to be suicide bombers using this exact technique, by the way. Same thing. Or school shooters. Oops. I guess I'm speaking out of turn. More evidence on that later. But you'll see a lot more of these techniques being done because it's convenient, especially when you find one of these radicalized people, you put cameras on them and you say, we need to stop this person, and use that to rationalize policy. That's the technique. Now, who's doing that? Whoever the fuck has the money, really.
So how do you de-weaponize witches?
Reduce the population.
All right, I won't ask a follow-up for that one.
Well, I don't mean to be so glib. You don't need to necessarily, blank out entire millions of population centers. That's not what I mean. You need to start isolating populations. You need to recreate that tribal experience somehow. If you can recreate that tribal experience, this is all a self-correcting problem. As long as people continue to keep playing this game where the entire universal consciousness has to be in my mind at all times, this is the psychological fuckery that happens.
All right, so let's pivot to the chats. Megatron, you had a question, and unmute yourself, ask your question to Pat. Only one follow up, and I see a lot of like WTF faces in the room right now. This is the first exposure to the Dark Stoa. And I don't want to Stoa explain to anyone, but this is an opportunity to practice one Stoicism today. So Megatron, you are up.
Remember, it's Dark Stoa. It's dark.
I think he might got scared.
He's asking if you can read his question for him.
Okay, gotcha. Why would you need women when you could use an AI or chatbot programmed as a psychological lookalike?
So the chatbot is nowhere near as effective as the actual feminine presence. We've tried chatbots of women, and usually people pick them up. And if you don't believe me, go to like fucking Omegle or sometime. You'll know when you're getting hit up by a female chatbot. Almost every guy has that sense. We know when we're getting hit on by a bot, so they don't work as well.
Evan, you had a question.
Yeah, so at least the way I'm interpreting what you've said in this session, it seems that you're describing a technique for detecting and converting or subverting people who have retained some level of immunity from being subsumed by higher simulacrum levels. So what do you think is the main causal node which leads to this dynamic? And do you think this node is a group of humans as opposed to an emergent dynamic at a meta level? And regardless of that, do you think that this node should be destroyed or fought against?
Sorry, 1 second. To reiterate a previous slide, I'm placing the blame squarely on population abundance. Our psychology shifts when we move from our psychology does its very best to get the Dunbar slots right, because naturally we want to make sure that that Dunbar slot represents one person, but we have tricks to ways to compress and that type of stuff. And even as we compress, it's not all is lost. We can actually go a bit beyond it, and that we can do that. But then when you introduce mass media and psychology and all these drugs and all this fucking crazy shit, then you just, oh man, it's psychological nihilism all the way down. So I think that even then, even those techniques, those are control attempts upon the abundance of populations. So it's not necessarily a Machiavellian plot from a central architect as much as it is power and just opportunists just trying to make the best of a crazy ride of abundant human beings. So I think this is I'm going to channel my inner Malthus here, which I don't like to do. But what I am trying to do is describe that population mechanics, when they shift, psychology shifts with it.
Okay, so quick follow-up. Do you think that shift should be resisted, or that it's just a completely natural good thing that we should just go over?
One way or another, it's self-correcting.
All right, Kara, you're up.
Hello. So my question is, why can't abundance morality last?
Right. A follow-up to my one way or another, it solves itself. So abundance morality has a very complicated reliance. Has a reliance on very complicated chains of dependency. So in order for us to have this conversation, we need to have computers. In order to have computers, I need to have the skill and the labor that can make those computers. I need people who understand the machines when they break down. I need an abundance of silica. I need copper workers. I need transistor people. I haven't even gotten to feeding these people yet. I haven't even gotten to the psychological well-being of these people yet. I need the entirety of civilization to make this computer so we can have communications. These are very complicated supply chains, and the more complicated they get, the more fragile they get. And as a result, I should now explain the relationship between why we have these complicated supply chains as populations grow, because the only reason populations grew is because we demonstrated mastery over nature with literally our technology. We found a way to fertilizer. We figured out atomic theory, so we threw fertilizer all over the place, and it made more food. So as a result, we have more people. So now there's more pressure to figure out to keep those people, not burning stuff down. So one thing leads to another, and you just end up with this complicated duct taped supply chain. And just a flick at the right spot and the whole thing comes tumbling down. And you'll see this with the collapse of the Bronze Age. 4 mega empires that lasted thousands of years fucking disappeared in 4 years because of supply chain collapse. So these are it is a self-correcting problem. The fragility of our supply chain eventually says this, nope, too much pressure's on it, gotta go.
And just as a quick follow-up, the self-correcting, but is it would you say it's a cycle? I mean, it's just something like an expansion and a contraction. It's just going to inevitably, blow up and then do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. Now it doesn't blow up universally. I need to make this known. It's not Armageddon apocalypse stuff I'm trying to sell here. Abundance is usually local, where you have like one plot of land is overextended, or one plot of land is like centrally absorbing the resources of all surrounding areas. The surrounding areas tend to go first, and then the central power either adapts by finding more resources, or it too then collapses. It's this stupid psychological seesaw where when we have a scarcity of population, we keep telling ourselves, man, I wish I had more farmers. And then that naturally leads us into a population abundance. And then we finally get there and we're like, man, I wish my supply chain was robust. And well, you can't. That's Tower of Babel stuff. You can't really break that. That's just the end of it. So.
All right. I'm reading another question. Can witches be diffused or detonated earlier?
Yeah, the filter does a good job at that. The filter will detonate them in advance. It takes skilled human designers, wink, wink, to make sure they can go through that filter well, to make them understand, like, hey, this is happening to you, and here's some guidance to get you to the next step. If you throw them in there, like, I don't know, a prison yard fight, it's kind of brutal. You're probably not going to get the results you want. So not all witches are the same. You want to make sure you're getting the one that is demonstrating the behavior you want. You want one that can be a psychopathic CEO, for example, so that they can champion your ESG corporation in 2 years. There's certain types of things you need to filter for. So you can't just can't take hood rats and just say, fuck it, we'll see what happens. It doesn't work that way. There is a little bit of guidance you have to do there, because if you don't do that guidance, those hard filters will trim them down, pre-detonate them, and then evacuate them from the competition. Sorry, my voice is going.
All right, I'm going to read another question. No one wants to be on YouTube for this one. Who does Pat think is doing the best work on rediscovering tribal modes of civilization to use today?
Ed Kaczynski. Oh shit, I said that out loud. I'm sorry. That was my inside voice. I had to leap at that. And Prim Tribal. Tribal is often has this brand associated with it. Like you got to be true to, like, I don't know, LARPing as a Papua New Guinean. I don't buy that. Tribal just means having your fucking Dunbar slots maximized to a single human being. I'm going to redefine tribal here, right? So that way it's accessible. You don't need to go like live in the dirt. Who the fuck wants to do that? Let's do something that we can actually do. Get your Dunbar slot to associate with a human. And if you could do that and all your Dunbar slots associate with a person, congratulations, you're tribal. You did it.
Daniel, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I just wanted to hear you said with the slide with the woman and the one line going this way and one line going the other way.
Sorry, you broke up.
Okay, you said somebody rushed the symbols to authority in terms of coupling the feminine with authority. I wanted to hear like more about that, or maybe like a specific example. Yeah, anything you could say more on that.
Yeah, I cannot give the name of the entity or group or effort to do so. I do not know that. I can only point to the fact that this was done through the word frequency, and this was done for any ontology of witch or feminine. And you can repeat this in Engram, and you'll see this. This is a thing. This explosion is happening, and because one can say, well, in the 90s, there was this resurgence of print, for example. Books were all over the place because, I don't know, the people in Manhattan were part of Oprah's book club or something. Sure, you can make that argument. But again, you see the closing of the gap between he and she, right? That is a strong indicator that there was something afoot here. So what entity was responsible for it? I don't know. But I do know that the feminist meme happened 20 years beforehand, and I'd start looking there if I were you.
So the feminine signifiers were more closely coupled with power, force. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, another mechanic you can look at here is that the vast majority of women are not part of the labor force of the human species. So there may be a capitalist economic opportunity going on here, meaning finding the cheapest labor that's available. Because after all, they're treating the boss's projects as surrogate babies, and their way of solving it is just filling themselves up with fucking antidepressants. So that seems like a fantastic workforce. They'll work forever and they won't complain. So there you go. If I was a capitalist, I'd look at that and be like, fucking get me more of those female robots. I need them. So if I had to think of it from a really like ruthless perspective, I would rule that one out first.
All right. We'll try to sneak in a couple more questions. Khalil, you had a question.
I have a different question than the one I put in, but so I guess someone asked earlier, what is the causal direction of these phenomena? Is there, you talked about the ideas and the idea of the witch, of Wicca and stuff like that. Is the causal direction from ideas? I guess it's a kind of banal question, from ideas to behavior, or from a kind of emergent behavior, and it's kind of cream off the top. The ideas are cream off the top of that, or yeah.
Yeah. So the one thing I did skip over, and it was primarily because of limitations, I didn't go over the ancient symbols of witches. I didn't do that. I went straight to the modern definition, right? Now there are ancient definition of witches that are very culturally sensitive. Not all of them are necessarily like, old green women standing over pots stirring stuff with a hat on. That's not necessarily the most predominant example of the feminine witch across different sociological spectrum. There are feminine shaman that exist in cultures. That's a thing. If I had to put a systematic on it, a rushed one for the sake of the question, I suspect that when you have population scarcity, when you have smaller tribes, small villages, there's a lot of communal effort that's done to make sure people are maintaining their expected asset valuation to each other. The blacksmith is doing his job, the mother's doing her job, the wet nurse is doing her job. Everyone's doing their thing because you are all you literally have. There's no insurance plan, there's no plan B, there's no nothing. It's your tribe versus nature, and that's life. Excuse me. So you're going to see a wide variety of social psychological experimentation in these isolations. Excuse me. You're going to see people their shamans are going to be doing very strange things between all of these different tribes, and that's to be expected because they're managing the space between a Dunbar slot representing a person versus representing other symbols, whereas most people aren't doing that. And so you're going to get wide variety of variation of that Dunbar slot management, mostly in the witches and in the shamans, the alchemists, and those spirit walker types. So I skipped over the ancient symbology of the witch because it is fairly fucking robust. There is a lot of different types out there. But all of them were ultimately subsumed or turned into a consumer product, and then that was the end of that. So.
All right. Pat, we're at the hour. Do you have time for like 10, 15 more minutes, or do you have to bounce? Yeah. Okay. Jason, you're up. Jason, if you can unmute yourself, can you read it for me, please? Okay. If witches are already operating in the cult space via twisted sexuality and abortion, can you induct them into healthy cults, Bronze Age goddess worship via the internet too?
Yeah. That was done before the internet. You see, there are these interesting takes where you see the anti-hero feminine of the 80s And then the 90s brings the resurgence of the light worker astrologist, right? So you have these two competing feminine symbols, and there's more, obviously, but those are the predominant ones because I think those are the easiest ones to market. I don't know the answer to that one, but I'm just going to use those two as examples for the question. Yes, there are multiple forces that can shift one to the next. Could be financial incentives, could be keeping up with the Joneses, could be social pressure, could be life earned experience, where being in that ridiculous space of being some kind of usable sex toy eventually reaches its cap and you're like, well, time to fucking bounce. This ain't working for me anymore. So these there are definitely pressures that can bring a person out of that space. Now, what they do after that space, I don't know. I don't think there's a strong probability distribution of what one does when they step out of that space. There's no proof to say that they naturally go into that light worker astrology, those darn Aquariuses type thinking. I don't know where that's a thing. But it is. I did 14 years in Hollywood. I describe it like living in prison. I've seen these people. I've seen them do this. I've seen girls come there at age 18 and just get fucking turned into meat. And I don't mean sexually. I mean just psychologically. There's nothing you could do because every day there's a new batch and they won't listen to you. So, I don't know, man. There's a lot of nuance there. I don't know. I don't know if there's a guarantee. I don't know if there's like press button, turn person into, not that. I don't know if that exists.
Any follow-up question? Oh, I read that one out loud, I think. Okay, Scott, you're up. Do you want me to read on your behalf too, Scott? All right. What is Trump? Is he a symbol of symbols? A resonant node?
I am a symbol of symbols. You are a symbol of symbols. I mean, if we're all symbols, we're all symbols of someone else at some capacity. Some people, their symbols can reach more than other people. They have better distribution. Some people have very dense symbols. And if you have the time and the neurological energy to decompress that, it's probably worth your while to go into that because you're going to learn a lot. Because in order to understand that one symbol, you need to understand like 10,000 other ones, like in full. So that's always worth doing when you got the cycles. But there are symbol economics are a whole totally different conversation. I go about that in Neuromythologies and Dark Stoa season 2. You probably want to check that out. Excuse me, because I go into the biological, neurological signatures of symbol creation and symbol propagation and neuron summoning and that type of concept. So if you're unfamiliar with that, I highly recommend that, and you'll understand how symbols can compress into each other.
Well, I was thinking, if I can follow up just a second, the concept that was put forward by Barrington Nevitt and Marshall McLuhan was that the president is the word that makes the market.
Yeah, I mean, the president is a symbol and Trump is another symbol entirely. And people don't like it when those symbols interact, apparently. But those symbols are their own different things. And when you put them together, President Trump is a new symbol as well. So it's symbols are infinitely compressible, but it is a lossy compression that has to be kept in mind.
All right. I have a question on that slide where you have like how to create your witch assembly line type thing, and then there was a disassociation. Can you speak on how that's happening on a mass scale?
Oh, good Lord. Disassociation. I mean, the only way you can use the internet is if you're disassociated. That's the whole purpose of the internet. Here's my account. That's my symbol of me. And then here's me, the person typing into it and feeding it. It is an intrinsic disconnection. It is an intrinsic disassociation. So if we're all here, even now, despite our human usage of the internet, we're not typing, we're not trying to increase the resolution of our symbol with words. I'm actually using language. I'm actually using body language now. Even now, with this increased resolution of symbol transmission, there is still a disassociation. So in order for this to work, there has to be a disassociation.
And can you speak more on the scarcity morality versus abundance morality and how that currently maps over to political dynamics?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is one of the easiest on-hand layman politics is the conservative and the liberal. Liber is the Latin word for free, meaning free man. Liberal being of a free man. That's what liber means. That's what liberal means in Latin. Conservative, conserve, obviously what they're conserving. That's up to marketing. They'll figure it out for you. But these are two different constructs. To conserve is the scarcity morality, and to expend because everything is abundant is the open is that liberal morality. Because you can expend it because nothing matters. It's so 100,000 people died in the war. Who gives a fuck? I got 100,000 more. Just ship them. Meanwhile, the conservative, the scarcity morality will say, "Don't send Adam. That dude's important. I kind of need him." Right. So these are two different mentalities. And again, the West, specifically the West, they have this stupid fucking tendency to universalize the axiom, which is the dumbest thing you could think of. Like, oh, I found this one pattern, I can extrapolate it indefinitely. It's like, fucking stop. Consider the idea that the axiom might be local first. Like, just start there, right? So why I'm pointing this out is because if you take like scarcity and you say, I only can do so many things, and so each action I do matters. You can't turn around and say, well, if I do this one action, I'll be able to repeat this action indefinitely. You can only do that in an abundance morality, because you can do that indefinitely. If your action fucks up, there's an entire network of surplus humans who are going to fix that as it goes along. So it creates the illusion of universalism. But in scarcity morality, universalism is not a thing. That shit does not exist. Those are examples of that morality being done, the actions they lead to, the priorities of actions that they give value to, I think.
Right. So Mrs. Clean wants the last question to be as clean as it can be. Then someone privately messaged me another question. If Pat was president, how would he act on this framework? What would he try to change first?
Press nuke. Screw it. The president is the worst job to have. Nobody wins as president. It is not a job to have. That is. God damn it. President is executor, right? It comes from Roman executive concept of Roman law, meaning you execute the will of the law, not the will of the people. It's a fine fucking difference, right? Well, mass media changed that, didn't it? I don't like the president question. Because it's a role. The presidency is a role. You have a specific job to do. The people who got you there, they bought for all your mass media. They bought all the hands. They bought all the shaking. They did all the graft. They did all the bribes. They did everything. They laid the whole road down. You serve them. You serve their interpretation of the law. That's the purpose of a president, is to serve the interpretation of a law, or at least the interpretation of how to execute the law, to be more precise. That's the goal of a president. Now, if I happen to be forced at that role, and the only way I would be put in that role is gunpoint, by the way. But if I was put in that role, how would I use symbols to execute the interpretation of the law of my funders? It's probably not the question you're trying to ask, I'm sure. But the thing that you can keep in mind is that the law is also symbols. And decrees are also symbols, and all these things are symbols as well. It's just that those symbols, all of civilization keeps them propped up. So when you say we're going to put this as the law of the land, and there it is, that's the law. Well, every organ of government either defers to that or supports that. They're either, the military is out there conquering treasure to support that law to continue to exist. And then when there's disputes in courts, you got to point to that law and say, okay, what's going on? How are we interpreting these symbols? What was intended? What's going on here? Blah, 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 this type of stuff, right? So the law as symbols is a reference. It's almost like they're like memes that don't die. I mean, the entire American legal system is built entirely on precedents dating all the way back to fucking English barristers. So it's all precedents, probably all the way back to Roman maritime law, if you really want to get into it. But that's all precedents. It's honoring a contract, honoring property claims, honoring all these things. So it's, symbols play a huge role there. And a lot of the symbol shenanigans you think you could do have already been like stamped out. In fact, law is notorious for having defenses against symbol attacks. That's kind of the purpose of the law. It's like testing what gets to endure versus what was just a real shit law. There's almost like a selection filter going on there too. So if something's able to endure, it's good luck trying to unroot that. Good luck trying to undo that. But I'm in the weeds here. I'm in the weeds about the technicalities of laws and symbols and stuff like that, only because the role itself is dependent upon executing the will of the law. So, boring bureaucrat answer. Sorry, it's the best I got.
All right. Unfortunately, Key's not here to close us off. Those are tradition at the Dark Stoa, ending with Key. But we'll close here. Pat, any final thoughts or closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, witches are commodities. Don't identify yourself with that. It's a commodity. You can go to Walmart and buy witches, and you can make your own homebrew, I guess. So it's like just look at that frequency distribution. That was done on purpose. There were people who funded that. There was money behind that. That wasn't just the zeitgeist. That wasn't people saying, it's witch time now, we're all here. There was advertising dollars put into that. There was printing press dollars put into that. Movie dollars were put into that. So just keep that in mind next time you fly off the handle or think you have to fly off the handle when someone talks about witches, because just, there's something afoot after the 80s and it's worth exploring. All
right. I'll make some closing thoughts in a moment, but
fly off the broom handle.
Thank you so much from coming to the Dark Stoa and giving another crack at getting us canceled. Greatly appreciated. So if you want to continue this discussion, Discord, more events at thestoa.ca. We have a Patreon and a Substack. Sunday, the metagame Mastermind is being launched, Limbic Unhijacking Edition. We're going to do some accountability groups in regard to that, so you can RSVP there. So Pat, everyone, thanks for coming to the Stoa today.
Thanks, folks.